You can't enter through the front entrance, ma'am. The sentence landed softly, professionally, almost politely. That was what made people stop and look. Not the words. The certainty behind them. The revolving doors of the Grand Ellison Hotel turned in slow glass circles beneath white lights and hanging banners, carrying in men in black tuxedos and women in satin gowns while the city reflected across polished stone. A line of black SUVs curved along the valet lane. Camera flashes blinked near the carpet. Someone laughed too loudly near the fountain. And 3 feet from the entrance, a woman in an emerald evening dress stopped walking. In her right hand was a small silver invitation card. Thin, plain, slightly bent at one corner. She looked at the hotel manager standing between her and the doors. Richard Whitmore had the posture of a man who had done this job long enough to notice details before problems happened. Mid-50s, tailored charcoal suit, tie perfectly centered, an earpiece disappearing behind one ear. He wasn't loud. He wasn't careless. If anything, he looked practiced at making difficult moments feel administrative. His eyes moved once, from the invitation card to her shoes to the entrance behind her, and settled. Staff check-in is on the west side, he said. No smile. No hostility. Just direction. The woman blinked once. I'm not staff. Richard nodded politely as though correcting a reservation. Then guest registration is inside, but only after credential verification. The line behind her continued moving. Nobody complained. Nobody asked questions. People adjusted jackets, checked phones, stepped around the moment the way people step around a puddle they assume belongs there. She lowered her eyes to the silver card for half a second. Her thumb smoothed the bent corner. Then she stepped aside. That was all. No explanation. No protest. One small movement. The kind people make when they realize they brought the wrong document or arrived at the wrong entrance. A valet opened another SUV door. 2 women in evening gowns walked past and were welcomed immediately. Somewhere inside, music drifted out, strings warming up before speeches. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Evelyn. Evelyn Carter stood near one of the stone planters outside the entrance and looked up. Wide white banners hung 6 stories high down the face of the hotel. Gold lettering. Crystal lighting inside. Through the glass, she could see movement. Servers carrying trays. Guests greeting each other. Photographers pivoting toward arrivals. The lobby looked warm from outside. Richard stepped toward another arriving couple and welcomed them with practiced ease. He checked names quickly, directed traffic, thanked donors by memory. Efficient. Alert. His staff moved because he moved. Nobody seemed afraid of him. Nobody seemed confused. Events like this only worked because someone controlled the flow. Evelyn stayed where she was. Her expression didn't change. She folded the silver invitation card once, not enough to crease it, only enough to flatten the bent edge, and slipped it into her evening clutch. Her dress wasn't dramatic. No diamonds. No statement jewelry. Hair pulled back. Low heels. She looked like someone who had chosen comfort over attention. Across the street, a city bus stopped at the corner and blocked the hotel for a moment. Reflections crossed the glass facade. For several seconds the banners disappeared behind moving windows and faces and ordinary people going somewhere else. Then the bus moved on and the hotel returned. A young guest near the entrance glanced at Evelyn briefly, then away. An older couple looked once and continued inside. Nobody stared. Nobody recognized her. Nobody had enough information to think anything unusual was happening. Richard returned after a few minutes. He stopped a respectful distance away. If you'd like, I can have someone escort you around to West Access. Evelyn looked at him. Not offended. Not embarrassed. Just measuring something. No, she said quietly. That's okay. Richard nodded once. He meant it. To him, the interaction seemed complete. He turned and walked back toward the doors. Evelyn, remain near the planter. Wind moved lightly through the entrance lane. Somewhere above, one of the banners shifted. She looked again through the glass. Not at the guests. Not at the lights. At something deeper inside the ballroom where the angle wouldn't quite allow a clear view. Then she looked down at her empty hand where the silver card had been. For a second, she smiled faintly to herself. Not because she knew something nobody else knew. Not because she had a plan. More like someone recognizing that a small thing had happened and deciding not to interrupt it yet. Then she adjusted one sleeve of her dress and waited. The hotel entrance continued swallowing people without interruption. The revolving doors turned at the same steady speed as before. White light, black coats, small greetings. Nothing dramatic enough to become memorable. Evelyn remained near the stone planter for another minute, maybe two. Long enough that staying there started to look intentional instead of uncertain. A valet pushed a luggage cart past her carrying garment bags and flower boxes with white ribbon. One of the ribbons slipped loose and dragged briefly across the pavement before being gathered again. Nobody noticed except her. She looked once toward the banners above the entrance. Gold lettering moved softly in the evening air. The words could not be read clearly from where she stood. They did not need to be. The event had already announced itself through scale alone. She reached into her clutch and took out the silver invitation card again. Under the hotel lights it reflected pale instead of bright. Not luxury, just brushed metal and engraved lettering. The bent corner remained. She ran her thumb over it once and slid the card halfway back instead of putting it away completely. Across the glass facade, reflections layered over the lobby inside. Guests arriving looked larger than the people already standing there. It created strange moments where someone entering appeared to walk through someone leaving. Richard Whitmore moved through all of it with practiced precision. He redirected traffic, thanked guests by name, adjusted timing between arrivals and photographers. Once he stopped an older donor from entering too early because cameras were repositioning. The donor laughed and obeyed. Richard smiled. Everything flowed again. Evelyn watched him the way someone watches weather. Not personally, just carefully. She noticed he never looked upward when speaking. He looked directly at faces, then immediately to hands. Tickets, phones, credentials, confirmation. He trusted systems more than impressions. That should have felt reassuring. A black sedan rolled up. Two guests stepped out carrying folded paper programs. One accidentally dropped hers. Before she noticed, Evelyn stepped forward, picked it up, and handed it over. The woman smiled automatically. "Thank you." Evelyn nodded and stepped back. Nothing else. The woman entered without delay. Richard saw the exchange. For less than a second his expression shifted, not suspicion exactly, but recognition. The quiet assumption people make when they think they understand someone's role in a space. Helpful. Nearby. Not attending. One of the hotel staff came outside carrying a tray of bottled water for security and valet. The employee hesitated, then offered one to Evelyn too. She accepted it with both hands and thanked him. She did not drink it immediately. She stood holding the cold bottle against her palm. The condensation gathered and ran across her fingers. Somewhere inside, applause rose briefly and faded. Not the main program yet, just arrivals being welcomed. A digital clock above the valet station changed from 6:47 p.m. to 6:48 p.m. Time felt visible tonight. Every minute moved people farther inside. Richard checked his watch once and spoke quietly into his earpiece. More cars arrived. More names confirmed. More doors opened. Evelyn finally walked away from the entrance. Not toward the street. Not toward the west side Richard had mentioned. She followed the edge of the building where tall windows revealed fragments of the ballroom beyond. White tablecloths. Hanging lights. Staff moving in clean lines. She stopped near one window where floral arrangements stood inside in tall glass cylinders. White orchids. Green stems. At their base sat small silver table cards. Same color as the invitation. In her hand. She looked at them for a second longer than necessary, then kept walking. Around the corner of the hotel, the noise changed. Fewer cameras. Less polished conversation. Temporary fencing. Equipment cases. Service entrances. A side patio opened into a narrow outdoor garden lit by warm string lights. A young woman stood there alone near a standing heater, smoothing wrinkles from a blue dress with both hands. She looked about 20, maybe younger. Not nervous in the dramatic sense. More like someone trying not to touch anything expensive. One of her heels caught slightly between patio boards. Before she lost balance, Evelyn stepped forward and steadied the chair beside her. The young woman looked up quickly. "Thank you. I am trying very hard not to embarrass myself tonight." Evelyn smiled once. "You are doing fine." The young woman laughed softly and looked down at the paper card hanging from a thin ribbon around her neck. Scholarship guest. She adjusted it immediately, as if she should not have let anyone see. Then she noticed the silver invitation card still visible in Evelyn's clutch. Her eyes paused there for a moment. Not recognition, just curiosity. "Are you heading inside?" she asked. Evelyn looked back toward the glowing windows. There was a pause, long enough to feel unfinished. "Eventually," she said. The young woman nodded as if that answer made complete sense. Someone called her name from inside. "Naomi." She straightened her dress, thanked Evelyn again, and hurried toward a side entrance held open by a volunteer. She disappeared into warm light. Evelyn stayed in the garden. The bottle of water remained unopened in her hand. The silver invitation card remained half visible. Through the window, she could see people taking their seats now. She looked once toward the front entrance in the distance. Richard was still there, directing arrivals with the same calm confidence. Then she looked back at the ballroom and waited. The garden stayed warmer than the sidewalk, but cooler than the ballroom beyond the glass. Evelyn remained near the standing heater without moving closer to the side entrance Naomi had used. The unopened water bottle collected more condensation in her hand. She finally twisted the cap loose and took a small drink. Inside, the room had shifted from arrival energy into structure. Tables filled, doors narrowed. Conversations became quieter and more purposeful. Through the windows, she could now see staff guiding guests toward assigned sections with practiced gestures. The event had entered the stage where being in the right place mattered more than arriving. A volunteer rolled a small podium across the ballroom. Someone tested a microphone. Another person adjusted rows of place cards. Silver cards, white cards, gold cards, different sizes, different access. Evelyn watched the movement without expression. A server pushed open the side entrance and stepped outside carrying folded linen. The door remained open for a few seconds. Warm light spilled across the patio stones. Through that narrow opening, Evelyn caught a brief view of the registration desk inside. Guests approached. Names were checked. Some received envelopes. Some received wristbands. One couple walked through after giving only their last name. Another man entered without stopping at all after exchanging a quick greeting and a handshake. Nobody asked for identification. Nobody looked at his credentials. The door closed again. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the silver invitation card in her clutch. Her thumb pressed once against the bent corner. Then she walked slowly toward the side entrance. Not rushed. Not hesitant. The volunteer at the door smiled automatically. "Registration is inside." Evelyn nodded and stepped through. The change in sound happened immediately. Carpet absorbed footsteps. Air conditioning replaced evening air. Glass and light reflected everywhere. The lobby extension connected to the ballroom through a long corridor lined with framed photographs of previous galas. Smiling recipients. Scholarship announcements. Donation milestones. Years displayed in gold lettering. Guests moved in smooth lines toward check-in. Nobody looked at anyone for long. Evelyn joined the edge of the line without speaking. Ahead of her, a man in a navy tuxedo arrived late and apologized to the staff. The coordinator laughed and said not to worry. She printed his badge immediately. Another guest forgot her invitation completely and was waved through after mentioning she knew someone on the committee. Evelyn reached the front after several minutes. The coordinator behind the desk smiled. "Welcome." Evelyn placed the silver invitation card down gently. The coordinator took it and paused. Her smile changed, not disappeared, just became procedural. She flipped the card over, typed something, waited, typed again. Richard appeared before she called anyone. Not rushed, not irritated, just present, as though he had already expected the possibility. He approached with the same calm confidence from the front entrance. "Good evening," he said. He looked at the card first, then at Evelyn. "I thought we had already helped direct you." No accusation, just memory. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Richard extended a hand, and the coordinator passed him the silver card. He examined it carefully, not dramatically, like someone doing quality control. "This credential does not appear active in the registration system." His tone remained measured. Nearby guests continued moving. Nobody stopped. He handed the card back, but kept 2 fingers on the edge for half a second before letting go. "Do you have a confirmation email?" Evelyn placed the card back into her clutch. "No." Richard nodded once, as though a pattern had completed itself. "Do you know the host contact?" Evelyn looked toward the ballroom doors where soft applause rose again. "No." He absorbed that answer without judgment. That was almost the difficult part. There was no scene, no raised voice, just decisions becoming easier. Richard stepped slightly aside and gestured toward a waiting area with upholstered chairs near the wall. If someone inside can verify your invitation, we will gladly bring you in. A woman behind Evelyn arrived with 2 guests and no visible credentials. Richard recognized her instantly. Mrs. Langley, wonderful to see you. He moved aside and welcomed all 3 through. No verification. No waiting chairs. They passed under the ballroom lights and disappeared. Evelyn watched the doors close behind them. Richard returned his attention to her. These events move quickly. It is better to confirm than create confusion inside. His expression was professional and sincere. He believed he was protecting order. That belief made him effective. Evelyn glanced at the waiting chairs. For seats, small side tables, water glasses, a bowl of wrapped mints. She walked over and sat. Emerald dress against pale fabric. Water bottle in one hand, clutch in the other. The silver invitation card disappeared back inside. Richard nodded politely and left. Time moved. Guests entered. Staff crossed. Nobody came for her. Above the corridor, a wall clock clicked to 7:03 p.m. Evelyn looked once at the framed photographs along the wall. Year after year of smiling faces. Then her eyes stopped. Not on a photograph. On a sponsored display standing near the ballroom entrance. Rows of logos printed in careful order. She looked at it for a moment too long. Then away. Across the room, Naomi emerged briefly from backstage carrying note cards and stopped when she saw Evelyn seated alone. Their eyes met only for a second. Naomi slowed. Looked toward the ballroom. Looked toward Richard speaking with staff. Looked back at Evelyn. Something uncertain crossed her face. Not recognition. Not understanding. Just the beginning of a question she was not ready to ask. Evelyn gave a small nod as if everything was normal. Naomi nodded back and continued walking. The hallway became quiet again. Evelyn remained seated. The unopened bowl of mints sat untouched beside her. The silver card stayed hidden. And for the first time that evening, the waiting itself started to feel official. The waiting area seemed designed to disappear. Soft chairs. Neutral colors. A side table with untouched mints. No sign saying wait here. No sign saying not here. Just enough comfort to make delay feel intentional instead of exclusion. Evelyn sat with one ankle crossed over the other and the unopened part of the water bottle resting against her wrist. The ballroom doors opened and closed every few seconds, releasing brief slices of sound into the hallway. Applause. Glasses touching. Someone laughing. Then silence again. She did not check her phone. She did not look. Impatient. She simply watched. Across from her, framed photographs reflected movement from the corridor. Guests passed through the reflections before they passed through reality. Some stopped to point at old Gala pictures. Some posed for quick photographs. Nobody sat in the waiting chairs. They were occupied only in theory. The wall clock changed to 7:09 p.m. A young man in a dark suit approached carrying a tablet and a stack of envelopes. He slowed when he reached Evelyn. Are you waiting for registration? She looked at him. I am waiting. He nodded quickly as though he understood and offered one of the envelopes. This has tonight's program if you want one. She accepted it. Thick white paper. Embossed lettering. Her fingers rested on the cover. Before she opened it, another staff member crossed the hallway and quietly said something into the young man's ear. The young man looked back at Evelyn and hesitated. His expression changed immediately into apology. Actually, those are for confirmed guests only. He reached out awkwardly. There was nothing rude in his face. Just correction. Procedure. Evelyn handed the envelope back without a word. He thanked her too many times and walked away. The chair beside her remained empty. The program disappeared. The water bottle stayed. She looked at the empty space where the envelope had been for one extra second. Then she looked away. Through the ballroom doors, she watched another arrival. An older donor entered late. Richard met him personally at the threshold, smiled, and skipped the registration line entirely. The man placed a hand briefly on Richard's shoulder. They exchanged a few words and entered together. No badge. No verification. No waiting chair. Richard returned moments later and checked something with the registration desk. Efficient. Controlled. Never rushed. Every decision looked reasonable when viewed alone. That was the difficult thing. Nothing dramatic happened long enough to become undeniable. A woman carrying flowers paused beside Evelyn. She sat down in the chair across from her and adjusted tape around one bouquet stem. Her event badge identified her as floral support. She noticed Evelyn and smiled. Politely. They started speeches early tonight. Evelyn nodded. The woman looked toward the ballroom and lowered her voice slightly. You are not missing much yet. Then she stood and left before the comment could become conversation. Human warmth. Nothing more. The hallway returned to quiet. Evelyn finally opened her clutch and took out the silver invitation card again. Under indoor lighting it looked different. Less like an invitation. More like something archival. The bent corner remained. She turned it once in her hand. Not reading it. Just feeling the weight. Her eyes lifted toward the sponsor display near the ballroom entrance. Earlier, she had only glanced at it. Now she looked carefully. Multiple names. Corporate logos. Scholarship partners. Hospitality sponsors. Donor circles. Rows organized by contribution level. Clean hierarchy presented as celebration. People walked past it and searched for names they recognized. Nobody looked at all of it. Only at the parts that reflected themselves. Evelyn watched 3 guests stop there. One pointed upward proudly. Another took a photograph. A third laughed and said she wanted to find her company logo. The display became less about sponsorship and more about belonging. That was when something shifted. Not anger. Not surprise. Just recognition. This was not about being denied by one person. The room itself had rules. Visible rules. Invisible shortcuts. Signals people learned to read. Clothes. Timing. Familiarity. Confidence. Permission. Richard had not invented them. He had become excellent at enforcing them. Across the corridor, Naomi appeared again carrying note cards pressed against her chest. She was walking with 2 event coordinators and speaking quietly. Then she noticed Evelyn still sitting in the same chair. Her pace slowed almost imperceptibly. Her eyes moved from Evelyn to the empty chairs beside her, to the ballroom entrance, to Richard speaking with guests. Naomi did not stop. She did not intervene, but she looked again, this time longer. One coordinator asked her something, and she answered too late. They continued walking. Evelyn noticed. She gave another small nod. Same as before. Everything normal. Naomi nodded back and disappeared inside. The ballroom doors opened wider for a moment. A spotlight crossed the room beyond. Someone announced the beginning of the evening. Applause followed. The doors closed again. Evelyn lowered her eyes and placed the silver invitation card carefully back into her clutch. Then she moved the water bottle from her right hand to her left and adjusted her sleeve. Nothing else. Just a small movement. But for the first time all evening, she did not look toward the entrance. She looked at the people moving through it. The applause inside ended with the soft, uneven sound that follows formal introductions. Not loud enough to feel important from the hallway. Just enough to remind anyone outside that something had started without them. Evelyn stayed seated. The water bottle beside her chair was half empty now. Small drops of condensation had left a faint circle on the side table. The wall clock read 7:16 p.m. Staff crossed the corridor carrying tablets, folded cards, replacement microphones. Everyone seemed to be moving toward somewhere specific. Nobody seemed lost. The waiting area remained untouched except for her. The sponsor display reflected ballroom light across the polished floor. Guests still paused there before entering, searching for names, pointing quietly, taking photographs. A man adjusted his tie in the reflection instead of the mirror. Another smoothed his jacket before walking through the doors. The display was becoming something else now. Not information. Permission. Evelyn watched without changing position. Richard passed through the hallway again. He noticed she was still there. His expression did not harden. If anything, it softened slightly in the way people soften toward situations they believe they already solved. He stopped near the registration desk and spoke quietly with staff. One coordinator glanced toward Evelyn and nodded. Another checked a screen and shrugged. Richard thanked them and moved on. Efficient. No drama. The machine remained polite. A server appeared carrying a tray of fresh water glasses toward the ballroom entrance. One glass tipped slightly and left a narrow trail across the tray. The server stopped near Evelyn and adjusted the glasses. She looked embarrassed. Evelyn reached over, took a folded cocktail napkin from the side table, and handed it to her. Here. The server smiled with relief. Thank you. She wiped the tray quickly and hurried away. The napkin remained unfolded in Evelyn's hand after. She looked at it once, then placed it beside the water bottle. Small things continued happening around her. Nothing that changed anything. The ballroom doors opened, and Naomi stepped into the hallway. She no longer carried note cards. Her shoulders looked tighter now, not overwhelmed. Focused. She walked quickly at first, then slowed when she noticed Evelyn still sitting in the same chair. This time she stopped. Only for a second. Long enough that leaving immediately would feel rude. Naomi looked toward the registration desk, then back at Evelyn. Hi. Evelyn looked up. Hi. Naomi shifted her weight. I thought maybe you went in already. Evelyn gave a small smile. Not yet. Naomi nodded like that answer made sense even though something in her face suggested it did not. She held a paper cup from backstage catering. Ice water. Without thinking much about it, she held it out. I grabbed two. Evelyn looked at the cup for a second, then accepted it. Thank you. Naomi sat in the chair across from her. Not close. Not fully staying either. She looked toward the ballroom doors. I speak in a little while. Evelyn looked at her. That is good. Naomi laughed quietly. That is one way to say it. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Just unfinished. Naomi traced one finger along the paper cup lid she still held. Then she looked at Evelyn again. You came alone? The question was ordinary. No suspicion. No curiosity beyond conversation. Evelyn nodded once. Naomi nodded back. I think that is brave. Evelyn looked at her for a moment. Why? Naomi shrugged. People act different at events like this. She glanced around the hallway and lowered her voice slightly. Everybody already seems to know where they belong. The sentence sat there quietly. Naomi smiled immediately afterward as if she had said something strange. Sorry, I talk when I am nervous. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom entrance. Then back at Naomi. No, you notice things. Naomi looked surprised by that answer. Someone called her name from inside. She turned instinctively. Before standing, she looked down and noticed the silver edge of the invitation card barely visible inside Evelyn's clutch. Her eyes paused. Not recognition, just memory trying to connect something. She looked up again. I like your dress. Evelyn smiled once. Thank you. Naomi stood and took a step away, then turned back. I hope you get where you are going tonight. Such a normal sentence. The kind people say without thinking. Then she disappeared through the ballroom doors before Evelyn could answer. The hallway became quiet again. Evelyn looked at the paper cup Naomi had handed her. Plain white. Cheap lid. Condensation gathering around the rim. She placed it beside the water bottle and looked at both for a moment. One offered by staff. One offered by someone who noticed. The wall clock moved to 7:19 p.m. Through the doors she could hear a voice beginning formal remarks. Somewhere farther down the corridor, Richard stopped to hold the entrance open for arriving guests. He smiled, guided them in, stepped aside. Nobody waited. Evelyn picked up the paper cup and took one sip. Then she looked once more at the sponsor display across the hallway, and for the first time that evening, she did not look at the names. She looked at who stopped to look at them. The voice inside the ballroom grew clearer as the doors opened again, formal and warm, the kind of voice trained to make gratitude sound organized. Evelyn could hear names being thanked in careful order. Sponsors, trustees, community partners, hotel leadership. Each title floated into the hallway, touched the marble walls, and vanished before reaching the waiting chairs. She sat still with Naomi's paper cup resting on the side table beside the hotel water bottle. 2 circles of moisture marked the polished wood now, one clean and one uneven. The silver invitation card remained inside her clutch, hidden except for a narrow edge that caught the light whenever she moved her hand. At 7:27 p.m., Richard returned with a woman from registration and a security supervisor who stayed half a step behind him. Not close enough to threaten, close enough to define the shape of authority. Richard approached with his tablet angled neatly against his palm. Thank you for your patience, he said. We have checked the active guest list, the late arrival list, and the sponsor allocation list. Your credential still is not matching tonight's system. Evelyn looked up at him. The hallway felt wider suddenly, because everyone else in it seemed to know which way to stand. The registration woman stood near Richard. The security supervisor stood near the wall. A passing server slowed, then decided not to. Richard continued. At an event with this level of donor attendance, we cannot allow unidentified guests into the ballroom without verification. I am sure you understand. The sentence was almost perfect. Careful. Reasonable. Built to make refusal sound like responsibility. Evelyn placed one hand on her clutch. It is an invitation card, she said. Only that. Richard nodded, patient. It resembles one. The registration woman looked down at her tablet. The security supervisor looked at the carpet. A silence opened. Not empty. Full. Evelyn's eyes moved once from Richard's face to the sponsor display, then back to him. Across the corridor, the ballroom doors opened again, and Naomi appeared near the threshold with another young speaker. She did not step out fully. She saw Richard standing in front of Evelyn. She saw the security supervisor. Her hand tightened around her note cards. No one else noticed her pause. Richard lowered his voice slightly, not to hide, but to contain. We have had situations before where people find old credentials or photograph invitations online. It is not personal. It is protocol. Evelyn nodded faintly, as though acknowledging the existence of protocol, not accepting its use. Behind Richard, a silver-haired man approached with two guests and waved at the registration desk from several yards away. The woman at the desk looked past Evelyn, smiled, and lifted the rope stand so they could enter without stopping. One of them still had a coat over his arm. No badge visible. No card in hand. Richard glanced back, recognized them, and gave a small approving nod before returning to Evelyn. The contrast took less than 10 seconds. It did not need more. Evelyn watched the rope fall back into place. "My name is spelled with an E," she said quietly. Richard paused. "Excuse me. Earlier," she said, looking at the tablet. The coordinator searched it without the second E. It was the smallest correction possible. Not a defense. Not a declaration. Just one letter. Richard looked at the registration woman. She checked the screen, tapped once, then shook her head. Still no active match. Richard's expression remained composed. If he felt corrected, he did not show it. That was part of his skill. He absorbed inconvenience without losing authority. Even with that adjustment, he said, "We are in the same position." The words gathered the hallway around him. The registration desk waited for his lead. The security supervisor waited for his signal. The staff adjusted their paths around the conversation. Even Naomi, still near the ballroom door, seemed held in place by a structure she did not control. Evelyn sat lower than all of them because the waiting chair had been chosen for waiting, not for conversation. Richard remained standing. His tablet became a lectern. His earpiece made him connected to rooms she could not enter. His calm made everyone else calm. That was the imbalance. Not volume, height, motion, access. "What would you like me to do?" Evelyn asked. Richard folded his hands around the tablet. "I would like you to allow us to preserve the integrity of the evening. If your host can come out and identify you, we will be happy to revisit this. Otherwise, I can arrange for you to wait in a more private area until we sort out who issued this card." The phrase sounded considerate. More private area. Not removal. Not rejection. A softer room for the same disbelief. Evelyn looked at Naomi's paper cup on the side table. The lid had softened slightly where her fingers had touched it. She looked at the hotel water bottle beside it. Clear plastic. Clean label. Different sources. Same condensation. "Here is fine," Evelyn said. Richard held her gaze for a moment. He did not understand why she would choose visibility over privacy. That uncertainty crossed his face and disappeared. "Very well." He turned to the security supervisor. "Please make sure this area remains clear during the program transition." The supervisor nodded. The instruction was mild, but the hallway obeyed it. A staff member moved a sign closer to the waiting area. Guests began giving the chairs a wider path. Naomi looked down at her note cards, then back at Evelyn. Evelyn gave her the smallest nod, almost invisible. Naomi did not move. Then someone called her from inside, and the ballroom light pulled her back through the doors. Richard stepped away, already speaking into his earpiece about dinner timing and donor seating. The machine resumed around him. Evelyn remained seated beneath the wall clock as it changed to 7:31 p.m. The silver edge of the invitation card caught the light once, then disappeared again when she closed her hand over the clutch. By 7:38 p.m. the hallway had changed again. The event had fully entered itself now. Fewer arrivals. More movement from staff. Doors opening only when needed. The waiting area no longer felt temporary. It felt assigned. Evelyn remained in the same chair with the same posture. Naomi's paper cup sat beside the hotel water bottle. One was nearly empty. One still had most of its water. The folded napkin had dried into a soft wave between them. The silver invitation card remained inside her clutch, invisible unless the light found its edge. Guests no longer glanced at her. That was the change. Earlier, she had been someone delayed. Now she had become part of the furniture of the corridor. People accepted her presence the way people accept a coat rack. A coordinator carrying seating charts stopped near the waiting chairs and placed a stack of spare programs on the side table beside Evelyn without looking directly at her. "Can you make sure nobody takes extras?" she said while adjusting her earpiece. Then she walked away before waiting for an answer. Evelyn looked at the programs. Thick paper, embossed lettering. She did not touch them. A few minutes later, another staff member came back searching for the same stack. She paused when she saw Evelyn still sitting there and quickly collected them with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry, wrong spot." She left. Nothing cruel, just assumption. Through the ballroom doors came another round of applause. Then music. Then silence again. Richard appeared once more from inside, carrying a folder now instead of a tablet. Two event staff followed him while asking questions about seating adjustments and timing. He answered without slowing down. Calm. Decisive. He saw Evelyn immediately. He stopped, looked at the side table, looked at the waiting area, then dismissed the staff with a small gesture. They moved away. Richard approached alone. "Ms. Carter." The name was pronounced correctly this time. Not warm. Not cold. Professional. Evelyn looked up. Richard remained standing. "We are entering the donor presentation segment." He glanced briefly toward the ballroom. "There will be more movement and media inside." A short pause. "I do not want you to feel overlooked." The sentence landed strangely. He continued before she answered. "If you would like, I can have someone escort you to the hospitality lounge downstairs. It is quieter, comfortable seating. Refreshments." He said it like a solution, like an upgrade, like care. Evelyn looked at him. "Thank you." Richard nodded slightly, expecting movement. She stayed seated. Another pause. He adjusted the folder in his hand. These events can feel personal when there is confusion at entry. They usually are not. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom doors. "Usually?" Richard followed her gaze. "People attach meaning to access." He said it gently. "Most of the time it is logistics." Then he added, almost kindly, "You should not let tonight define your impression of places like this." The hallway became very quiet. Not because people stopped moving. Because for a second nothing else seemed close enough to matter. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. Then she asked, "Places like this?" Richard seemed surprised by the question. "Only briefly. Large donor environments. Formal events. There is a rhythm to them." He smiled politely. "The first time can feel unfamiliar." He meant reassurance. That was what made it stay. Evelyn looked down at Naomi's paper cup. Her fingers touched the softened edge of the lid. Then she looked back up. "I see." Richard nodded once. The conversation appeared complete to him. Behind him, the ballroom doors opened wider than before, and guests inside turned their attention toward the stage. A large screen lit the room in pale gold. Richard looked at his watch. Timing mattered. He stepped back. "If your contact appears, we will revisit." Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached into the folder and offered her a printed venue map. "This may help if you need to find your way later." He held it out casually, the same way someone hands directions to a visitor. Evelyn looked at the folded map, then accepted it. "Thank you." Richard smiled once, satisfied in the way competent people become satisfied after solving a problem cleanly. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom entrance where someone immediately stopped him for guidance. He answered confidently and disappeared into the flow again. Evelyn remained seated holding the venue map. She opened it slowly. Ballroom. VIP reception. Hospitality lounge. Service access. Restrooms. Emergency exits. Carefully designed routes for belonging. Her eyes stayed on the page for a few seconds. Then she folded it again and placed it beside the silver invitation card inside her clutch. Across the hallway, Naomi emerged halfway through the doors. She was carrying her note cards differently now, tighter against her chest. She looked toward Evelyn automatically. She saw the folded map in Evelyn's hand. She saw Richard already gone. Her expression changed slightly. Not understanding. Not yet. Just that uncomfortable moment when a pattern repeats one time too many. Naomi looked like she wanted to say something. Instead, she only asked quietly, "Are you okay?" Evelyn looked at her and smiled faintly. Not brave. Not sad. Just present. "You should not be late." Naomi nodded. She stood there 1 second longer than necessary. Then she said something ordinary. Sometimes people explain things they have never asked about. She looked embarrassed immediately after saying it. "Sorry." I should go. She turned and disappeared back inside before Evelyn could answer. Evelyn looked at the closed doors, then at the water bottle, then at the paper cup, then at the folded venue map. The silver edge of the invitation card caught the light once inside the clutch and disappeared again. She sat back in the chair and did nothing. For the first time that evening, she was no longer waiting to be let in. She was watching. The hallway settled into a different kind of quiet after Richard left. Not emptiness. Maintenance. Staff moved. Doors opened and closed. Shoes crossed carpet. But the energy no longer reached Evelyn's chair. It moved around it. The wall clock changed to 7:46 p.m. Somewhere inside, a speaker thanked sponsors for creating opportunity. The applause that followed was measured and brief. Evelyn remained seated with the folded venue map inside her clutch and Naomi's paper cup beside the hotel water bottle. The paper cup had begun to soften where her fingers had held it. The water bottle still looked untouched, professional, identical to every other bottle stacked behind service stations. She looked at both for a moment and then reached for the paper cup instead. The water inside was warmer now. She took one small sip. Across the corridor, the sponsor display reflected ballroom light. People still stopped in front of it, but now she noticed something she had not seen before. Nobody stayed long. They searched for their own connection and moved on. Nobody looked at the full wall. Nobody stood back to see all of it together. One man found his company name and took a picture only of that section. A woman smiled at a donor title and sent the image to someone. Another guest adjusted her dress in the reflection and never read anything at all. The display had become less impressive and more revealing. The hallway doors opened, and a staff member wheeled out an empty floral cart. White orchid stems trimmed earlier now lay discarded inside clear bags. The arrangements visible in the ballroom looked perfect. The leftovers did not. Evelyn watched the cart disappear down service access. Her eyes followed it longer than necessary. A memory arrived and left quickly. Not a scene, not a story. Just hands placing folding chairs in straight rows before an event began somewhere years ago. Someone saying quietly, "People remember the stage. They forget who made the room." Then the memory was gone. She blinked once and looked back at the corridor. Naomi appeared again for only a moment. She crossed from backstage carrying a different set of note cards now. She was moving faster than before. Someone spoke to her. She nodded automatically and almost kept walking, then noticed Evelyn still in the chair. Her pace slowed. She lifted her hand slightly as if to wave, but stopped halfway and changed it into adjusting her hair instead. She smiled once and continued on. No rescue. No interruption. Just acknowledgement. Evelyn watched her disappear, and something shifted, not in what she thought, but in where she was looking. She turned away from the ballroom doors and looked instead at the hallway itself. Registration desk. Security position. Waiting chairs. Sponsor display. Service access. Directional signs. Nothing hidden. Everything visible. Every person in the building had been guided somewhere. Some people received doors. Some received instructions. Some received waiting. Richard had not raised his voice once. Nobody had. That realization arrived quietly. This evening was not built from dramatic moments. It was built from hundreds of small confident decisions that felt reasonable one at a time. Evelyn looked down at the folded venue map. She opened it again. Her eyes moved across printed routes. Ballroom. Reception. Hospitality lounge. Service corridor. Staff access. Exit. The map was clean. Neutral. Efficient. No route said who belonged. People supplied that part themselves. Her thumb rested on the paper for a second. Then she folded it differently this time. Not along the original crease. Smaller. Neater. She placed it back beside the silver invitation card. The card caught the light briefly. Earlier it had felt like proof. Then access. Then contradiction. Now it looked different again. Not because of what it could unlock. Because of what it had revealed without opening anything. Evelyn closed the clutch and placed both hands over it. She looked toward the ballroom doors and listened. Another speaker inside. Another round of applause. Another transition. Time continued whether people entered or not. The wall clock changed to 7:49 p.m. A custodian pushing a quiet cleaning cart paused near the waiting area and looked at the 2 cups on the table. "You done with these?" he asked softly. Evelyn looked at them. The hotel water bottle. The paper cup. She shook her head. "Not yet." He nodded immediately. "Okay." He moved on. Such a small exchange. But after he left, She looked at the cups again. One had been offered because she was waiting. One had been offered because someone noticed she existed. She picked up the paper cup and held it in both hands for a moment. Then she said something so quietly nobody else heard it. That is not the same thing. She stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She smoothed one sleeve of her emerald dress, picked up her clutch, left both cups where they were, and walked toward the large ballroom windows instead of the entrance. She stopped there and looked in. Not at the stage. Not at the people speaking. At the room itself. Then she stood still. She stood by the ballroom windows long enough that the reflection became stronger than the room behind the glass. For a moment, she could see both versions at once. The stage lights. The tables. The guests leaning forward. And over all of it, her own outline in the emerald dress standing outside the angle of participation. The wall clock turned to 7:53 p.m. Inside, someone was introducing the next segment. A camera operator moved quietly between tables. Staff adjusted doors so they opened less often now. The evening was protecting its rhythm. Evelyn stayed where she was. Her hands rested lightly over the clutch. The folded venue map and silver invitation card sat together inside it. Different kinds of access. Different outcomes. She looked once toward the waiting chairs. Naomi's paper cup was still there. Nobody had cleared it. The hotel water bottle remained beside it. The two circles of moisture had spread and merged into one uneven shape on the side table. Evelyn watched that for a second. Then she reached into her clutch and took out her phone. No hesitation. No performance. She unlocked it and stood near the window where the ballroom noise softened into glass. She selected a contact and waited. The call connected quickly. A calm voice answered. Good evening. Evelyn looked through the glass before speaking. Hi, Dana. No surprise on the other end. No concern in the tone. Just readiness. Hi. Evelyn waited one breath before continuing. Can you help me verify something? Of course. She looked toward the sponsor display across the hallway. I need the event authority chain for tonight. Venue. Program administration. Access approvals. Also send me the hospitality agreement and guest credential process. A short pause. Paper moving faintly on the other end. Keyboard sounds. Do you need anything escalated? Evelyn looked at the ballroom. No, another pause. Do you want someone there? Evelyn thought for half a second. One person. Quiet arrival. Dana did not ask why. Understood. Evelyn added one more thing. And check whether the scholarship speaker packet changed this afternoon. Silence for less than a second. I will call you back. The line ended. No urgency. No explanation. Evelyn put the phone away. She remained where she was. Nothing visible had changed. People still walked. Doors still opened. The hallway still belonged to itself. Across the corridor, Richard emerged speaking with a donor couple and an event coordinator. He was fully inside his role now. Confident. Precise. He pointed toward seating sections, answered timing questions, redirected a photographer without slowing his pace. The donor laughed at something he said. Richard smiled. His work was good. The evening worked because of people like him. He noticed Evelyn standing at the windows, but did not alter course. If anything, he seemed reassured. She was not trying to enter. Not making demands. Not creating friction. From his perspective, the situation had stabilized. A coordinator approached him holding a seating tablet and asking about overflow placement. Richard took it and solved something in seconds. Efficient. Trusted. The hallway bent naturally around his decisions. Evelyn watched without expression. Her phone vibrated. Once. No sound. She looked at the screen. A short message. Received. She did not open anything further. She slipped the phone back into her clutch beside the folded map and invitation card. Then she walked, not toward the ballroom entrance, but back to the waiting area. She picked up Naomi's paper cup first, then the water bottle. She carried both to a nearby recycling station and stood there for a second before stopping. Instead of throwing them away, she returned and placed both back exactly where they had been. Same positions, same distance apart. Then she sat again. A small action, meaningless to anyone watching. Across the hallway, Naomi stepped out briefly after finishing her segment preparation. She noticed Evelyn sitting again. She noticed the cups had not moved. Her eyes lingered there for a moment. Then she looked at Evelyn's face. Something in her expression softened, not because she understood anything, but because she recognized patience when she saw it. Naomi gave a small wave. Evelyn returned it once. No more. At 8:01 p.m., the elevator at the far end of the corridor opened. A woman stepped out carrying no badge and no event materials. Dark suit, flat shoes, slim portfolio under one arm. She looked ordinary in the way people look when they belong to systems instead of rooms. She did not walk toward Evelyn immediately. She stopped near the sponsor display and quietly looked at the event signage first. Then she checked something on her phone. No hurry. No announcement. Richard noticed her only briefly and looked away again. She did not look like a donor. Not a guest. Not a problem. The woman walked to the registration desk and asked something quietly. The coordinator answered. The woman nodded once and thanked her. Then she stood near the hallway wall and waited. She did not look at Evelyn. Evelyn did not look at her. The ballroom doors opened again. Applause rolled out and disappeared. Richard continued directing traffic without interruption. The wall clock moved to 8:03 p.m. Nothing had happened yet. But for the first time that evening, the waiting no longer felt passive. At 8:03 p.m., the ballroom changed tone again. The applause inside this time was slower, more attentive, not louder, more deliberate. The kind people give when they know the program has moved from introductions into meaning. Evelyn remained seated. Her clutch rested on her lap. The folded venue map sat beside the silver invitation card inside. Naomi's paper cup and the unopened water bottle remained on the side table exactly where she had left them. Across the corridor, the woman in the dark suit still stood near the sponsor display with her slim portfolio closed against her side. She did not look impatient. She looked like someone waiting for a line in a process. Richard crossed the hallway carrying his folder and noticed her. Professional recognition activated immediately. He approached with the same calm confidence he had shown all evening. Good evening. Are you with the venue group? The woman smiled politely. Not exactly. Richard nodded once. Can I direct you somewhere? She looked briefly at the ballroom doors before answering. I was asked to verify an event authorization file. Richard's posture changed only slightly. More attentive. Operations. She shook her head. Governance. Such a small word. Richard remained composed. Understood. Registration can help you. She thanked him and walked calmly to the desk. Richard continued moving. Nothing in him suggested concern. Why would there be? The hallway had behaved exactly as designed all evening. Evelyn watched without expression. Her phone vibrated once. She looked at the screen. One short message. Confirmed. She locked the phone again. The ballroom doors opened. Naomi stepped out. Not hurried. Different now. Her note cards were gone. She looked like someone who had finished something and not yet returned to being herself. She saw Evelyn immediately and walked over halfway before stopping. I already did my part. Evelyn looked up. How did it go? Naomi smiled uncertainly. People listened. Evelyn nodded once. Naomi looked at the cups, then at Evelyn, then toward the ballroom. That is usually enough. The sentence seemed to surprise Naomi herself. She smiled awkwardly and looked away. Before she could say anything else, movement started at the registration desk. The woman in the dark suit had opened her portfolio. No dramatic reveal. No folder turned around. Just documents laid flat. The registration coordinator leaned forward. Looked once. Then again. Her expression changed the way people change when a familiar word appears somewhere unexpected. She stood, quietly excused herself, went into the ballroom. Richard noticed and followed with his eyes, but did not interrupt. 30 seconds later, the coordinator returned with another event administrator carrying a tablet. They spoke quietly with the woman. The tablet changed hands. Screens turned. Someone scrolled. Nobody raised their voice. Naomi noticed too. Evelyn stayed seated. The event administrator looked toward the ballroom doors, then toward the sponsor display, then slowly across the hallway. Her eyes landed on Evelyn. She stopped. Looked again. Not recognition of a face. Recognition of context. She walked directly toward the waiting area. Richard intercepted naturally. Everything okay? The administrator lowered her voice. I just need a quick clarification. Richard smiled. Of course. She turned her tablet slightly toward him. He looked. His expression did not collapse. It narrowed. He took the tablet. Read carefully. Scrolled back. Read again. His posture remained controlled. Too controlled. Then he looked across the hallway. Not at Evelyn first. At the waiting chairs. The paper cup. The water bottle. The place where she had been sitting for over an hour. He looked at the silver edge of the invitation card visible inside her clutch. Then back to the screen. Naomi watched without understanding. The hallway seemed to become quieter, although nobody stopped moving. Richard handed the tablet back and asked one question. Very softly. When was this updated? The woman answered just as softly. It was not updated. Richard looked at her. She added, it was already in place. Silence. Longer than normal. Not confusion. Calculation. Richard turned slowly and walked toward Evelyn. Same pace as before. Same posture. Only one thing had changed. For the first time all evening, he did not stop standing over her. He stopped beside the empty chair. Evelyn looked up. Richard looked at her. For a second. Then at the silver invitation card. Then back at her. He spoke quietly. May I see that invitation again? Evelyn opened her clutch and handed him the card. He held it differently this time. Not checking authenticity. Reading. His thumb passed over the bent corner she had smoothed hours earlier. He turned the card over. There was no secret mark. No hidden code. Just information he had not looked for before. His eyes moved once. Stopped. Moved back. He lowered the card. Naomi stood completely still. The woman in the dark suit remained where she was. The registration desk went silent. Richard looked at Evelyn. His face stayed professional. But something underneath had lost certainty. Not panic. Not fear. The harder thing. Recalculation. He handed the card back carefully. Then he asked a question that changed the shape of the room without changing its volume. How long have you been waiting? Evelyn took the card and looked at it for a moment before putting it back into her clutch. Then she answered. Long enough. Nobody moved. Not even the doors. For a few seconds the entire hallway seemed to notice itself. No one moved immediately after she answered. The hallway remained exactly as it had been for hours. Same lights. Same doors. Same sponsor wall. Same waiting chairs. That was the strange part. The room had not changed. Only the meaning of it had. Richard stood beside the empty chair instead of in front of it. He kept his expression neutral and professional, but neutrality suddenly looked like effort. The woman with the portfolio remained near registration. The event administrator stood still holding the tablet against her chest. Naomi had stopped halfway between the ballroom doors and the corridor without realizing she had stopped. Evelyn sat with the silver invitation card back inside her clutch. The bent corner disappeared beneath the fold. Richard spoke first. Quietly. May I have a few minutes? Evelyn looked at him. Of course. He nodded once. Then turned to the administrator. Private room. Not an order. A request shaped like one. The administrator hesitated. Her eyes moved briefly toward Evelyn before she answered. There are timing. Implications. Richard replied immediately. I understand. The woman in the dark suit finally stepped closer and spoke for the first time directly into the conversation. There are several implications. Her voice was calm. Richard looked at her. She continued. Contractual. Procedural. Public. She did not elaborate. Richard nodded. He understood enough. He turned back to Evelyn. Would you be willing to step into the conference room for a few minutes? Evelyn looked at the ballroom doors. Then at the waiting chairs. Then at the paper cup and the water bottle still sitting side by side. Yes. She stood. Naomi instinctively moved aside to clear the path without knowing why. As Evelyn passed, Naomi looked at her and opened her mouth as if to speak, then stopped. Evelyn smiled gently and kept walking. The conference room sat off the main corridor behind frosted glass. Inside were 12 empty chairs, bottled water arranged in straight lines, untouched notepads, and a screen displaying the event schedule. Richard closed the door softly. Not fully. Half open. The woman with the portfolio entered. The event administrator stayed outside and made a phone call. Evelyn sat at the far side of the table. Richard remained standing for a moment before taking the seat opposite her. He placed both hands flat on the table. No performance. No apology. Just structure. He looked at her. I want to understand what happened before I respond to what happened. Evelyn nodded once. Richard continued. The credential did not populate through our event system. That should not happen. He paused. I followed the process available to me. Evelyn looked at the table. I know. That answer seemed to surprise him more than accusation would have. He looked down briefly, then back up. You stayed. Evelyn did not answer immediately. People stay more often than you think. Silence. Richard looked away for the first time all evening. Toward the conference room screen. Toward nothing. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at it. His expression changed almost invisibly. He stood and stepped outside to answer. Through the partially open door, Evelyn could hear only fragments. No, not yet. I understand. No statements. Yes, tonight. Another pause. If we move too fast, we create a different problem. He listened. Understood. He ended the call and remained outside the room for a few seconds. Through the glass, he could be seen speaking briefly to the administrator. She looked concerned now. Not frightened. Concerned the way professionals become concerned when they realize a process has legal weight and human consequences at the same time. Richard returned. He sat again. I need to tell you something. Evelyn looked at him. Go ahead. He folded his hands. If this becomes public tonight, the scholarship segment will disappear. The headlines will become the room. He did not say reputation. He did not say hotel. He did not say donors. But they were all there. People will make the story smaller than what actually happened. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. He continued carefully. I am not asking you to ignore this. Another pause. I am asking whether timing matters. The room stayed quiet. That was the counterweight. Not denial. Not defense. Responsibility. Somewhere beyond the conference room wall, applause rose again inside the ballroom. The event continued. Naomi's speech. Scholarship announcements. People who had nothing to do with the hallway. Evelyn looked down at the conference table. 12 water bottles. 12 empty chairs. Then she looked at Richard. For the first time all evening, she saw something different. Not authority. Not certainty. Cost. If she pushed now, the evening changed shape. If she stayed silent, something else stayed unchanged. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Dana. Short. Documentation secured. Awaiting instruction. Evelyn looked at the screen and locked it again without replying. Richard noticed and looked away. He understood enough not to ask. Another silence. Longer than before. Then Evelyn asked one question. How many people know? Richard looked toward the door. Right now? He thought for a second. Less than 10. Evelyn nodded slowly. Her hand rested over the clutch where the silver invitation card and folded venue map sat together. She looked at the conference room door left open exactly 6 inches. Then she said quietly, leave it open. Richard looked at her for a second, then stood and opened the door all the way. Outside, the hallway looked exactly the same, which suddenly made it harder to look at. The conference room door stayed open. Nobody closed it again. The hallway remained visible from every chair inside, and the hallway could see in. People passed without looking directly, which meant they looked more carefully than before. Richard remained standing near the table now instead of sitting. The woman with the portfolio had moved into the room but stayed near the wall, writing notes in a small notebook rather than typing. The event administrator stood outside the doorway speaking quietly into her headset. Evelyn stayed seated with her clutch closed in front of her. The silver invitation card and folded venue map remained inside. Her phone rested face down beside her hand. At 8:14 p.m. another call came to the conference room screen. No sound, just an incoming request. The administrator entered and looked at Richard. They want 10 minutes. Richard nodded. Take it here. She connected the call. Several faces appeared. Not many. No grand board meeting. Just people who looked tired and practiced. One asked for a timeline. Another asked whether the event was stable. Another asked if guest experience had been affected. Nobody asked who was right. Nobody asked for apologies. They asked about exposure. Contracts. Process. Richard answered every question directly. Time of arrival. Verification steps. Registration logs. Waiting protocol. Security involvement. He did not hide anything. He did not dramatize anything. He never once used the word incident. Evelyn listened quietly. One person on the call finally asked, current recommendation? Richard looked briefly toward the open hallway before answering. Continue the event. Short pause. Suspend external statements. Another pause. Begin independent review of access procedures before next activation. The people on the screen nodded. One asked, tonight? Richard answered immediately. No silence. Then, tonight we finish what people came here for. The call ended. The screen went dark. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The woman with the portfolio closed her notebook. She looked at Evelyn for the first time directly. There will need to be documentation. Evelyn nodded. There should be. Richard remained standing. He looked like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see yet. Then he said something unexpected. Not to defend himself. Not to protect the hotel. If you want a formal response tonight, it will happen. He looked toward the ballroom. But the cost will not be paid by the people who made this mistake. Evelyn looked at him. Richard continued carefully. Sponsors leave. Scholarship commitments shrink. People simplify stories. He paused. That does not excuse what happened. Another pause. But consequences travel. Nobody answered immediately. Outside the conference room, the ballroom doors opened, and a group of scholarship recipients crossed the hallway laughing quietly with name badges hanging from thin ribbons. One of them stopped near the sponsor wall and took a picture. Another adjusted her borrowed jacket. Then they disappeared inside. Evelyn watched them pass. Her eyes followed the badges, the ribbons, the ordinary excitement. Then she looked at Richard. What happens after tonight? Richard did not answer immediately. That was new. Earlier, he had answers immediately. Now he thought. Depends whether we treat this as an exception or evidence. The sentence stayed in the room. The woman with the portfolio wrote it down. Evelyn looked toward the waiting area outside. The chairs were still there. The paper cup, the water bottle. Nobody had moved them. She stood, walked into the hallway. Everyone in the room followed with their eyes, but nobody followed physically. She crossed to the waiting chairs, picked up Naomi's paper cup in one hand and the hotel water bottle in the other. She stood looking at them. Then she handed both to a passing staff member. Can you leave these for now? The staff member looked confused but nodded. Sure. Evelyn returned to the conference room and sat again. Such a small thing. But now the objects stayed because someone chose to keep them, not because someone forgot them. Her phone vibrated. Dana. 1. Message. Review package prepared. Awaiting release. Evelyn read it and locked the screen. Richard noticed, but said nothing. She placed the phone face down again. Then she looked at the administrator. I want one thing tonight. The room became still. Evelyn spoke quietly. No internal summary tomorrow that calls this a misunderstanding. Nobody moved. The administrator nodded first. Not quickly. Carefully. The woman with the portfolio wrote again. Richard looked down once and then back up. That is fair. Evelyn shook her head slightly. No. She looked toward the hallway. Fair is not the goal. Silence. She looked at the waiting chairs again. Accurate. Nobody answered. At 8:23 p.m. applause started again in the ballroom. Stronger this time. Someone had just finished speaking. Naomi appeared briefly near the doors and looked toward the conference room. She could not hear anything. She only saw people sitting differently than before. She looked confused for a second. Then she noticed the waiting chairs still untouched. The paper cup still there. The water bottle still there. She looked at Evelyn. Evelyn gave one small nod. Naomi smiled faintly and disappeared back into the ballroom. The event continued. The room continued. Nothing had been undone. Nothing had been solved. But the shape of what came next had already changed. By 8:51 p.m., the gala had begun emptying itself in quiet layers. Not all at once. First the donors who had early flights. Then the guests who wanted to avoid valet traffic. Then the staff carrying plates through service doors with their shoulders slightly lower than before. The ballroom music had softened into something meant to accompany exits rather than celebration. Outside, the city street shone under a thin mist of rain. Headlights moved across the hotel windows in long white streaks, and the banners on the building shifted gently in the night air. Evelyn stood in the hallway near the same waiting chairs, no longer sitting in them. Her emerald dress looked darker now under the dimmed corridor lights. Her clutch rested in one hand. The silver invitation card was inside, along with the folded venue map, both carrying more meaning than they had been designed to hold. The paper cup and the hotel water bottle still sat on the side table. The rings of moisture had dried into pale marks on the polished wood. Someone had placed a small note beside them after the meeting, not an apology, not a statement, just a temporary hold marker from the administrator so they would not be cleared before the review photographs were taken. The objects looked ordinary again. That was what made them difficult to look at. Richard stood several feet away speaking quietly with the woman in the dark suit and the event administrator. His tie was still centered, his posture still disciplined, but the certainty around him had thinned. He was not ruined. He was not begging. He was listening. When the administrator mentioned the preliminary review schedule, he nodded and asked if front desk staff would be included before leadership interviews. The woman with the portfolio said yes. Richard looked relieved by that, almost sadly relieved, as if the thought of the wrong people carrying the cost had been bothering him more than he wanted visible. Evelyn noticed. She said nothing. The ballroom doors opened, and Naomi stepped out holding her scholarship folder against her chest. Her blue dress was wrinkled now from sitting. One heel made a soft, uneven sound against the floor. She saw Evelyn and slowed. This time she did not stop at a distance. She walked all the way over. For a moment neither of them spoke. Around them, staff rolled away flower stands. A photographer packed lenses into a black case. A server collected and used programs from a side table and stacked them evenly. Naomi looked at the two cups, then at the waiting chairs, then back at Evelyn. "I know who you are now," she said softly. Evelyn looked at her, not surprised, not proud. "Do you?" Naomi nodded, then shook her head a little. "Not really." The honesty of it made Evelyn smile. Naomi looked toward the ballroom where the stage was being cleared. "They told us this gala was about access." She looked back at the chairs. "I kept thinking about where you were sitting." Evelyn followed her gaze. The chairs looked smaller now, less official, more human. She opened her clutch and removed the silver invitation card. The bent corner was still there despite all the smoothing. She held it for a moment, then offered it to Naomi. Naomi hesitated. "Is that okay?" Evelyn nodded. "Keep it until next year." Naomi took it carefully with both hands, as if it might be heavier than it looked. The brushed metal caught the hallway light and reflected across her fingers. Earlier, it had been proof that failed. Now it looked like a promise someone would have to honor. Naomi placed it inside her scholarship folder, not as a souvenir, as evidence of something she had witnessed and would remember differently later. Richard approached only after a long pause, stopping far enough away to leave Evelyn the choice to look at him. She did. He folded his hands in front of him. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "I am sorry for my part in what happened tonight. No audience. No announcement. No performance." Evelyn looked at him. "Your part matters." Richard nodded once. The words landed, and he accepted them. "Yes." He glanced toward the waiting area. "I thought I was protecting the room." Evelyn looked through the open ballroom doors at the emptying tables, the folded napkins, the half-cleared stage. "You were protecting a version of it." Richard took that in. He did not answer quickly. For the first time all evening, quickness would have sounded false. Behind him, the administrator taped a printed notice to the registration desk for the next morning's internal staff briefing. Access protocol review. Mandatory attendance. No press language. No celebration. Just a change with a date, a time, and people required to be in the room. Outside, a valet brought Evelyn's car around without being told twice. Not because he suddenly knew everything. Because someone had updated the process before the night ended. Small. Visible. Incomplete. Evelyn noticed that too. She turned back to Naomi. "You spoke well tonight." Naomi looked down, embarrassed. "I was nervous." "Good," Evelyn said. "That means it mattered." Naomi smiled faintly. The hotel lights dimmed one section at a time. The sponsor display still stood across the hall, but without guests around it, the names looked less like status and more like responsibility. Evelyn looked at the side table once more. The paper cup, the water bottle, the dried rings. Then she picked up the folded venue map from her clutch, opened it, and placed it gently beside the cups. Richard watched the small action without asking what it meant. Naomi watched too. The map showed every route in the building. Ballroom, lounge, service corridor, front entrance, back entrance. For the first time that night, it looked unfinished. Evelyn stepped away from the waiting chairs and walked toward the doors. No one announced her. No one applauded. Outside, the rain had stopped. The pavement held the city lights quietly. Behind her, Naomi stood with the silver card in her folder. Richard stood beside the open hallway, and the hotel remained exactly where it was, changed only by what it could no longer pretend not to see. Evelyn entered the night slowly. The front door stayed open.